In today's video, let's take this mess of a base and restore it into this base, as well as make some homemade chalk paint. This is a dresser I found off Facebook Marketplace. The legs have been replaced. The top drawer is broken. There are some pretty severe damages in the veneer that need to be fixed, but I only paid $35 for it, so I might as well go ahead and get it. So I did, because I love mid-century dressers, but we're going to fix this up and make it look completely different. All right, prep work. This piece has a lot of repairs that need to be done, so let's get right to it. Normally I start with removing the hardware, but this dresser doesn't have any hardware, so right to cleaning we go. When cleaning your furniture piece, you just want to make sure that your cleaning solution is a degreaser. My bottle did say Windex on it, but it's actually a dilutive formula of LA's Totally Awesome Cleaner and Degreaser. I just spray a liberal amount of cleaner on the surface and wipe it with a rag. I clean the outside of the dresser, the front of the drawers, the inside of the drawers, and inside the body of the dresser. You always want to clean your piece first so you don't rub any oil or dirt down into the wood. A nice clean surface is best for your paint or primer to stick to. Plus, it gives you a chance to assess all the damages that you need to repair. I forgot to record it, but after cleaning, I rinse the piece off with some warm water and a cloth, and then let the piece air dry. I then flip the piece over to assess the bottom. I remove the legs that someone else had added. They are cute, so I will definitely save them for another piece, but to me, they just didn't seem right for this piece. I then removed all the additional wood and the skirt in front, so I have a nice flat surface to attach the base that I want to build. On the left-hand side, you can see that I'm missing a piece of trim for the bottom of the dresser, so I will have to glue and hammer a piece of wood there, so I have a nice sturdy surface to attach that new base to. I then take some measurements for my trip to Home Depot, so I know how much wood to get to build my new base. With originally what I had in mind, I thought I was going to have to remove this wood piece, but I didn't end up having to do that, so I just kind of did a little bit of extra work. But that's okay, sometimes that happens. All right, more repairs. That veneer is completely coming off, so I grabbed my Gorilla wood glue and added a strip of glue right there on the edge, and then I have a weight, just weight it down and grab a clamp and then let that set overnight. The next morning, I started with wanting to fix the chips in the veneer, so I grabbed Bondo. Now this is my first time using Bondo. I add way too much of the red strip here. You just need a little bit, because the more red stuff you add, the faster this stuff sets. I learned that the hard way. You just mix the two parts until they're one color, and then use a putty knife to apply the Bondo to the areas that you want repaired. I ended up having to make a couple batches for all the repairs that I needed, and I learned as I go. I made sure that I added less of the red part, so I had a little bit more time to work with it. It still dries fast, so work quickly. Also, it stinks, so make sure it's very ventilated. I'm not wearing a mask here, but I do end up grabbing one. This prep work's making me hungry, so I went inside to make breakfast for my family. One of my amazing work perks is getting to try out and review this Orfeld masticating juicer. Orfeld now has juicers available in the US. They start at $119 and go up from there depending on what your needs are. I'll definitely make sure to put a link down below in the description for you. It comes with everything included here in the box, and it is so easy to assemble. And it's also very easy to use. You basically just pick your fruit or vegetable, go ahead and cut it up into wedges or slices. If you're doing fruit, make sure there's no core or seeds, and then you're going to place your fruit or vegetables down into the juicer. I love tomato juice, so I picked tomatoes. They're pretty soft, so I put it on the soft setting and use the guide to press them down, and voila, the juice happens. Listen to how quiet this is. This thing is quiet, this thing is easy to use, it's easy to clean up, and it yields a higher amount of juice than other juicers out there. It's also pretty small, so it doesn't take up much room in my kitchen at all. I'm so happy that I now have an Orfeld masticating juicer to help get my family the nutrition that they need. Bon appetit. Now let's get back to flipping some furniture. All right, then I set my attention on repairing that top busted drawer. Now, I am not a woodworker by any means, so do not come after me in the comments about my process of fixing this drawer. The bottom and the back of the drawer is all intact. It's really just the front piece that has come off. So I grabbed my Gorilla Wood Glue. I applied glue on both sides, and then I placed the piece back on, but I wanted it to be secure, so I grabbed some small nails and then hammered them down. So obviously I don't want nails sticking up, so I end up grabbing a large screw and kind of hammer the nail down more so the head of the nail sits down below the surface of the wood, and then I cover the head of the nail with wood filler. This is probably not the best way to fix it, but it worked for me. To fix the bottom trim piece for the new base, I hammered a piece of wood in place, glued the veneer panel to the side, and then clamped it to set overnight. While all of those repairs are drying and setting overnight, I have my husband help me build the new base for this dresser. This base tutorial is off DIY's YouTube channel. I'm not going to go over all the measurements and all that because she breaks it down for you, but I will definitely link her video in the description. So if you're interested in building a base yourself, you can hop over to her channel and she'll break it down for you. Quick version of how to build a base though is you cut pieces of wood, new trim, and then you have 4 legs. She gives you all the measurements how to do that. Use a Craig jig to drill the holes and then screw it all together to make your base. It was so easy to do. I will definitely use it from now on when there are dressers or pieces of furniture that I want to lift up off the floor. Just look how awesome that looks. If I can make one of these, you definitely can too. After I got the base all together, there were some little rough edges from our cut, so I grabbed some 120 grit sandpaper, put it over a sanding sponge, and then just went over all the edges and knocked off any loose pieces that were remaining from our cuts. And then dusted off the piece so it was ready to paint. Now that the base is sanded, let's get the body of the dresser sanded as well. I'm using my Surf Prep sander. If you watch my channel, you know that I use this sander often. I got it a few months ago and I freaking love it. It has the vacuum hose attachment to my shop vac, so I get very little dust residue left over from sanding. Here I'm using a piece of 150 grit sandpaper on my Surf Prep sander to scuff sand the surface and also to smooth out the Bondo that I used. Sometimes with Bondo, you don't get a flush surface the first time around. You can see right there in the middle of the dresser where I am sanding where it's not flush. So I came back with a second coat of Bondo, let it dry for about 20 minutes, and then sanded it smooth. You can repeat this process until you get a flush surface. There were a few areas that my Surf Prep sander couldn't get, so I just grabbed some 120 grit sandpaper and sanded it by hand. I then wiped off all surfaces with a damp lint-free cloth to remove any dust residue. I don't typically show it in my videos, but I'm not just using one damp rag for the entire wipe down. I do go inside and rinse out my rag multiple times underneath the sink water. After the surface was dry, I used painter tape to mark off the areas inside the dresser and the drawers that I did not want paint to get. All right, surprise, surprise. Again, I'm using Zinsser's Shellac Base Primer. Mid-century pieces are one of my absolute favorite to flip, and I have just had so many bleed through with water-based primer. So if it's a mid-century piece or even later than that, I'm more than likely going to use a shellac-based primer. I say more than likely because just like in life, there's always exceptions to the rules. Pro tip here, use a disposable microfiber roller and a liner in your paint tray for easy cleanup. Another pro tip here, I use saran wrap to wrap around my paint tray so I don't have to pour it back into my can. It keeps it nice and airtight and nothing dries out. I let my primer dry for an hour, grabbed a 220 grit piece of sandpaper, put it over that sanding sponge, and then lightly went over the surface to knock back any microfiber roller marks. And then dust the surface off with a lint-free cloth before applying a second coat of primer. Words become very hard sometimes. I then let that second coat of primer dry for about 4 hours. All right, time for paint. This is my favorite part. This is a mist tint color I got, a Bear Marquee latex paint that I got from Home Depot for $9. We're gonna mix it with that BB Frosch to make some homemade chalk paint. I have made homemade chalk paint plenty of times, but this is my first time using BB Frosch. I think that little jar is about $10, $12. I added 4 heaping tablespoons of BB Frosch into a container and then added 2 tablespoons of water. I should have done 3 because my consistency was a little thick. It's supposed to be like donut glaze and mine was more like frosting on cinnamon rolls. And then I added 2 cups of the mist tint paint. All right, for any and all chalk paints, I mist the surface first. I take my brush, dip it an inch into the paint, wipe the back side off on the container, and that's the amount of paint that I work with. You can just see here how much that little bit of paint goes a long ways. And that's with latex or chalk paint. I work in sections. Now this top is a large section, so I'm going to divide it into 3 parts. I do the front, middle, and the back. I basically go along the front side, spread the chalk paint on, kind of going in whatever direction I want to. The directions say with the BB Frosch to go in the crisscross pattern. I don't really like that. I just kind of went back and forth till I got the coverage I wanted. And then I go back over in my section in long stripes so the brush strokes go all one way. If you are new to painting or this is your first time watching my channel, I will let you know that thinner coats are better than doing thicker coats. You will have less brush strokes that way. And the BB Frosch, I was actually quite pleased with the amount of brush strokes. There weren't hardly any at all, and it just went on really smooth. I like it. I will definitely be checking out that mist tint section more often for latex paint that I can turn into my own chalk paint. And this is what I mean by thin coats. You can see the primer through my first coat, and that's okay. That's what you want for the first coat. I let the first coat of paint dry for an hour, and then I grabbed a fine grade sanding sponge, lightly went over the painted surface, and then wiped it with a lint-free cloth to remove the dust residue before applying a thin second layer of paint. I let that dry, sanded it, wiped it down, painted again for 3 total layers of paint. Pro tip, remove your painter's tape while your last coat of paint is still wet to lower the risk of pulling up the paint when you remove the tape. Look at that nice solid coverage, and it just feels so smooth. Alright, it's all about that base now. I'm going to do a beige wash on the base. That's kind of hard to say. I am using a French beige from Vintage Paints. I just pour a little bit into a container and then add water. I'm doing a 50-50 ratio, so equal parts of paint and water. So it's going to be pretty watery. Beige washes or white washes are just really simple ways to lighten up wood and still show the wood grain. You basically just paint on a layer of paint and then go back over it with a paper towel or t-shirt piece to wipe back some of the paint. You lighten up the piece, but you're still able to see the wood grain. If too much of the wood grain is showing for you when you wipe it back, repeat the process again so you have more of a beige color. It's simple, easy, and beautiful. I let all the coats of paint set overnight, and the next morning came back out with that fine grit sanding sponge and then lightly went over all the painted surfaces. And then wiped the dust away with a lint-free cloth. I'm using Varathane's Ultimate Polyurethane in a satin finish, but I'm putting my Dixie Belle Gator Hide sponge in a piece of pantyhose or knee high. This is a trick that I saw from that shabby guy. I will make sure to link his YouTube channel in the description, but the pantyhose over the sponge is supposed to help remove streaks in your top coat. In my opinion, it did just that. Now, it was a little bit of a learning curve for me because I had never done this before. So I really do like using my Gator Hide sponge to add my top coat when I can't spray it. If you've watched my channel, you've seen me do this a couple times before. The only complaint I have about using the Gator Hide sponge, though, is that it absorbs up too much of the top coat, so sometimes it gets very drippy. But the pantyhose acts as a barrier, and that doesn't allow it to happen. Plus, the holes in the pantyhose are a lot smaller than the holes that are in the Gator Hide sponge or any top coat sponge, so you really do get that smooth, streakless finish. I love this trick, and I will definitely use it from now on. Just look how smooth that goes on, and it just looks like glass on that surface. I let the first coat of polyurethane dry for 2 hours. Grab my fine grit sanding sponge, lightly go over the surface, wipe the dust away, apply a second coat of polyurethane. I do the same process on the base as I do the body of the dresser. I allow 2 hours of dry time between each coat with the light sanding and light dusting. You know that you're doing the right thing in life whenever you just start dancing because you're happy that you're working. Get it, girl. I hope that you find whatever it is in life that makes you dance for no reason at all. All right, time to add the last coat of poly. The body of the dresser, the drawers, and the base got 3 coats of poly. The top ended up getting 5 because, as I stated before, I had a little bit of learning curve with this pantyhose over the top coat sponge. But I figured it out in the end, and the top of this dresser is super protected. As I finish up applying that last layer, I look at my piece, decide I really like it, and then victory dance. Oh yeah, I'm done. Get it? Uh-huh. Oh wait, just kidding. I still have to let this dry and then add the base on, so I'm not quite done yet. After I let the poly dry for about 6 hours, I had my husband help me flip the dresser over. I have it on a fuzzy blanket, that way it won't scratch, and I'm just using my little Craig jig drill bit to put the screws in and attach the base to the dresser. Just a quick reminder here of what we started with and what it looks like now. I just love restoring forsaken pieces. Speaking of which, I have been asked to collaborate with a lot of YouTube furniture flippers and an Ugly Duckly challenge coming up on August 21st, so make sure to tune into that. I absolutely love this base. I love the mist tint paint color. I love BB Frosch. It all came together to make an absolutely stunning piece. I am so happy I was able to save this piece and give it a second life. So let's talk about the numbers. I bought it for $35. I spent about $30 on the base, $10 in other supplies, in 8 hours of labor. I have it listed for $480. It hasn't sold yet, but I'm confident it will soon. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, until next time.